Yeah.
Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, October 9th Board of Education meeting. The board has been in closed session since 6 o'clock this evening, discussing student discipline, probable or imminent litigation, and employment of employee. First order of business, roll call. There are 6 members present. Mrs. Deroni is absent this evening. Next, Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next is public comments. Are there any? Seeing none, we'll move on to Superintendent's Communications. Mr. Perdue.
Yes, this evening, as the board surely knows about, we have been working on district performance indicators for across the district. We have also had discussions on the goal setting for the district for this school year. And in your information this evening is a summary of those discussions. And what we wanted to present this evening were the key performance indicators as we have discussed, and along with that, the further discussion on which one of those key performance indicators we would set as goals for this coming school year. And so those are highlighted for you in yellow in your packet. And so what I'm asking for tonight is a review of both the key performance indicators and the goal setting that was discussed at the August retreat. And later in the agenda, I'm asking the board to adopt those formally as the goals for the school district for the 2012-2013 school year. Again, I want to thank the Board of Education, the administrative staff, and faculty who have really talked about these key performance indicators, who have come together and have identified these as the key performance indicators that we will be periodically reporting to the public and to our stakeholders across the community. These are part of our accountability system that we're going to have in place. One of the pieces that we are still missing is the satisfaction survey data, and that'll be coming up at the end of October, November. We've talked about that. So that is the only data piece that right now we're missing in this, in the performance indicators. So with that, if there's further discussion or changes, we need to capture that tonight. And then again, I would ask the board to adopt these formally this evening.
Next is committee. Oh. Any discussion on that point?
So just to recap, though, several board meetings ago, you had presented all of these key district performance indicators, and we as a board had a discussion about which ones were of significance, and that's how it was set as goals, and those are highlighted in yellow. And the items or the key performance indicators that are in white are still things that we're measuring as a district, but the ones in yellow kind of funnel up to the top and can be almost an umbrella if you think about it.
Yeah, and I think what we're saying, there's a couple of things. If you remember, also remember that we have district performance indicators, almost 160 district performance indicators that are not presented, but we have shared with the board. Those are leading indicators that are related to these key performance indicators. So departments, schools will be tracking some of those other district indicators, but those will not be reported on a periodic basis. These key performance indicators are the indicators that we will continually update to the Board of Education and to the public when new data comes in. As we have strategic plans to address some of these issues, we will come back to the board and report on progress. What you've identified in the yellow are the goals that we feel a priority to look at for improvement in the coming school year. And so with that, we will take these back to the educational community in Elmhurst and say, please start looking at these, and we'll have strategic discussions on how we may improve those areas in yellow that the board has identified as goals for this coming school year.
Mr. McDonough?
This is a great thing, and I'm very grateful to be a part of this process. And again, I keep saying there's another most important thing that we've done. This was a really important thing that I wish more people had been involved in and participated in the public. We had a meeting this past summer, and nobody really showed when these things were initially rolled out and people started going through there. But there's some really good things. It's telling the public these are the things that we're going to see as success. And I'm hoping people will take a look at these things and look at these important things, and they're measuring what they're measuring, and then make a determination whether the school board is meeting its mission. So I just wanted to say that if we could ask the public to take a look at these, there's a great piece of work here. A lot of time went into it and a lot of thought, and I'm very happy with the results.
Just added, I have shared these with PTA Council, for example, so I've tried to bring this out to the public in those forums to say these are the kind of performance indicators we're looking at as a school district that we're going to be held accountable for. And this goes to accountability. It also goes to the fact that we're not going to guess what is being successful. We're actually going to measure it now with data, and I think that's an important change in what we're doing. I think it's not we think it's doing well. We want to see the data to say, is it doing well? How do we know? And how do we improve it?
Mrs. Ebner, can I? Or Mrs. whichever, jump ball.
Okay. Tomorrow night there's a curriculum committee meeting, and one of the agenda items was to discuss the target for advanced placement. Do we want to discuss that tonight, or the committee can discuss that tomorrow and then come back to the board with a recommendation for target? Because that's one of our key, I mean, that's the one in yellow, so we need to, before we get too much further along in the year, finalize that target. So we were supposed to have a curriculum committee meeting last Wednesday, but that got delayed till tomorrow night. So the timing was a little bit off, unfortunately. So I guess we'll go ahead and discuss that tomorrow night.
I would suggest that you discuss it in committee. You can then bring it back to the next board meeting in your committee update, and we can discuss it then.
Next board meeting.
Yeah.
On the 25th.
Yes. Mrs. Hirsch.
Yeah, I just wanted, and I don't mean to be piling on with compliments, but when I came on the board almost 4 years ago, we were not as focused on measuring and accountability as we are today and where we sit today. And I don't want to say that measuring everything is the most important thing. These are children. These are amazing beings that are growing and stretching in different ways at different times. But I do think the power of putting goals and targets out 5 years out, and the other thing that Mr. Pernot has brought us is not only have we set goals at the board table, where we're a little disconnected, honestly, from what happens in all of our buildings and in our central office. But these are pervasive throughout the organization, up and down, vertically, horizontally. And so everyone in the district has a piece of this that they own and are responsible for. And I think that's a great example of accountability, not just for the 7 of us sitting here, but throughout the organization, the emphasis, and we are reinforcing the message that we're sending by setting specific targets for all employees. So I applaud the effort and the leadership that Mr. Pernot has provided us on this endeavor.
Yeah, if I can just sum up the sum up, right? You know, as a school district, we're in the business of shaping futures. And there's an old adage that if I can measure it, I can improve it. And the measurement is something that Mr. Pernot has brought to the table that has been a key to his success in his previous school districts. And he's brought that to Elmhurst with the full support of the Board of Education. So these targets are, as we achieve them, as we move forward, we'll raise our bar. And we intend to review these at least yearly and change what needs to be changed and refine it as we go along. And so, Mr. Pernod, thank you for bringing this to Elmhurst. And I think we will see increased success and more rapid success as long as we all know what goal we're after, and we've laid them out here. With that, shall we now move on to committee reports? The Board Improvement and Policy Committee.
The Board Improvement Policy Committee met on September 27th. We discussed both policy and board improvement. Under policy, policy 6-40, field trips and recreational class trips. This was, the committee is recommending that this policy be brought to the full board for a first reading. However, we also had from Mr. Pernod that there will be field trip guidelines that are being developed to supplement the policy. Policy 7300, extracurricular activities. Once again, the committee recommended that this policy come before the board in the future for first reading. And really, just to highlight for you, it's the extracurricular athletics philosophy that's being added to the policy. Policy 880, gifts to the district. This is just really clarifying at what level does the board have to approve gifts that are gifts to the district, and see, that's really the clarification on that policy, and the committee is recommending that policy be brought to the board for a first reading as well. Policy 2150, committees. We looked at this policy for the third time now, after a lot of discussion at the board level as well as at the committee level, and we are recommending, this committee is recommending that this policy be brought to the full board for a first reading. And in addition to this committee policy, that we would develop a committee guidelines. So that is being worked. There's a possible new policy for state payment offset that was recommended from the Finance and Operations Committee, that our policy committee consider this new policy that would be entitled State Payment Offset. It's really, this policy would be set in conjunction with an intergovernmental agreement that would be between the Illinois Office of the Comptroller and District 205. It's really regarding access to the Comptroller's local debt recovery program and allowing District 205 to use the Comptroller's offset system to collect debts owed to the district. So it really is a new policy that we should put in place to allow the district to recoup and collect those debts that are owed to the district. So the committee recommended that this new policy be brought to the full board for a first reading. In addition to the policy being brought before the full board for a first reading, that the committee is recommending that the intergovernmental agreement be brought to the full board for approval. So heads up on policy. We spent a lot of time on policy, so we only have a few things for board improvement this particular committee meeting, and we really want to focus on engagement of the board and the community, specifically the community forum, which has been confirmed for November 5th. It will be held here at the District 205 office from 7 till 9 p.m. And we're really looking at having a similar format to last year. And thank you to the PTA Council for helping us with that. And really we'll have the same, let's say, topic groups from last year. And they would parallel our committee. So it's Finance and Operations Committee, Curriculum Instruction, and actually, that's it. We'll probably have a catch-all for policy and board improvement. We had a few different board improvement updates. We looked at Meet the Board, and we discussed as the committee, we'd like to recommend to the full board that we'd have a Meet the Board event again in June of 2013, like we did in 2012. The committee briefly discussed the approach to how we can complete several outstanding items, one of which is our Board of Education self-evaluation next steps and the vision, mission, and belief statements, so I look forward to those. We also talked about finalizing the school liaison program, and I know that we had put the guidelines together. All the board members provided input, feedback, and the last thing that we wanted to do is make sure that we highlight the parameters for classroom visits. So that's what the last open item is. And lastly, the legislative update, just a FYI that I will be meeting with Peg Agnos, our LEND Executive Director, and John Moss, Legislative Liaison for Glenbard District 87, who has been in that position for 3 decades. So that we can finalize our proposed legislative engagement plan that you all have seen and we've been working on in this committee, but I just wanted to let everyone know that actually tomorrow I'm meeting with them and getting their expertise on specificity on that engagement plan as we embark upon further legislative engagement by this board with our legislators after the November election. So that's what I had on behalf of the committee.
Any questions?
One comment about the community forum. We discussed having at the beginning of the forum a brief presentation on our key performance indicators to let the community know this list that we just reviewed, briefly talk about that, and then do the breakout sessions. And there'd be like 2, using this room, 2 sessions here, and then one other additional room.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, just to build on, I'll dovetail this with the Finance Committee, but the local debt recovery program, one of the aspects of that, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but it could represent substantial savings over the way we currently do things on the collection side. Right now we use a collection agency which gets a % of what's recovered. You don't have that fee built into what we're doing through the state level. So it represents an opportunity, I think, to do things maybe a little bit more efficiently, save a little bit of money while still maintaining the option of the collection service. Did I say that right?
Yes, that's correct. We should save on the fees related to that collection service.
Mr. McDonough, you had something as well.
I just, the policy was already written, there just wasn't enough time to get it on the agenda. Is that the intergovernmental agreement is pretty much a form thing that you sign with comptroller to tie into their system, isn't that right, Dave?
It's my understanding, yes. So
Okay.
we'll put it on the next agenda.
On the next agenda. Okay, great.
Anything else? Let's move on to Finance and Operations.
All right, the Finance and Operations Committee met on September 18th. Items discussed include the August monthly financial report. I think, once again, it's early in the fiscal year. We are on plan. Is there anything else, Chris, that you want to add? The fund balances are in line with where we thought they would be. I mean, again, it's very early. The second thing we discussed was the athletic budget. One of the things that we, as a committee and as a board, have asked of the administration is I mean, I guess I'll call it activity-based costing, but the opportunity to tie spending to our priorities is what the ultimate goal is. And the first step in that process involves allocation of expenses into certain buckets so that we can start to get a true picture of what it costs us to do things. The first step, the first project in that process was the athletic budget at York High School. And so Chris shared with us a draft, and I apologize, it was posted on board docs late, but it's a first cut at the athletic budget. We're still going through it, making sure that the allocations, the assumptions are in line. But I mean, basically, what it is it's the, and again, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the people and the equipment costs that are in there. It does not include facilities costs, nor does it include any revenue from outside groups that help us. So it's and within that budget. Within that budget, it's you'll find that we spent $1.2 million on athletics at York. It's offset in part by $250,000 of activity fees, which are directly offset the spending of $1.2 million. And the other revenue that we look at, there's a little bit for gate receipts, but ultimately the district funds a little over $900,000 out of the general fund towards the athletic program. And so, again, this is one piece. I think that our endeavor is to create transparency and tracking of the money flows so that, again, we can match up where our resources are being dedicated with where our priorities are. So I'd like to thank Chris and his group for a lot of the hard work. I've been through this on the private sector side in my own life, and I know it's not easy to do. And it's a great first step, and I think that Chris has indicated that they're working on other extracurricular activities along with other areas within our budget to start to add some clarity, more clarity to what we're doing. Sure.
Just while you're on that topic, this was something that has been a discussion for a couple of years in terms of how much does it cost to run these extracurricular activities and how much the parents contribute to offset those costs. I'm really thrilled to see solid information, solid data, solid numbers in terms of costs. I think there were some discrepancies or there was some confusion in terms of the accuracy of the numbers that we have been working with when a prior board had to make budget cuts and increase fees for these athletic activities. So I think the underlying goal was that we need to ask those responsible for running these activities to know their costs, to manage their costs, and our end goal is not to continue to increase fees to parents, but the end goal was to cover a rational certain percentage of each athletic endeavor. And so I think if we have a better handle on our cost structure, there was also, at least from one board member's perspective, an attempt to encourage all of the staff involved in these activities to tightly watch their costs and reduce their costs if at all there were possibilities to do so. There isn't always a possibility to reduce the cost, but I think having the daylight on it is a very good step in the right direction. So thank you for continuing to pursue this.
Sure, and I would also like to add, I think as you talk about our philosophy, I think we've tried to maintain as many programs as possible because we do believe in the value that extracurriculars provide to the educational experience. And fees was one way to maintain rather than cut programs. So, again, you get some idea of the magnitude of the fees versus what we spend and contribute. The second thing I would add there, too, is that I'll give Chris a little cover here. This is a first cut at that. These are the directly allocable expenses that were identified. These aren't things that we took 1/10 of this and allocated it over there or not. And so when you go through these allocation exercises, always at the end of the day you're going to end up with a pot of expenses that may not be directly allocable. And so we will have a discussion at some future date when he gets down to that, which could be a ways away because this is a lot of work that he's got to do in the meantime. So this is a first crack. It gives us a pretty good, clear picture, directionally correct. I just hesitate to, claim that this is the exact number to the penny at this point in time. So I'll just give that caveat to it.
Mr. Bloom, as long as we're jumping in
sure,
on this topic.
Go ahead and drain this one.
I've heard comments, seen some correspondence that the perception among some people is that the fees that parents pay for their children to participate in athletics don't go back to the athletic department. So could you, you've said it once, but I think just for clarity, if you could just say it again, what these fees offset, and they are not additional to the athletic department, but rather they help offset costs. If you could just explain that.
Yeah, I think the best way to explain it is that all of those fees Chris captures in a line item on the athletic department's budget here, and those amount to about $250,000. I think if you look at all of the costs of the athletic programs, it's $1.2 million. So as you can see, they offset a small portion of the cost of those programs. But from an accounting perspective, we're able to capture all of those, put them on the budget line, on the revenue line, and then look at the cost side there, which again is significantly larger than the revenue line item.
So fees cover less than a quarter of the costs of the athletic program at the high school.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, somewhere between 20 and 25%.
Thank you. Ben, please continue.
Sorry, I'm going to do one more. The other discussion that we had a couple years ago when we had to implement the fees, that there are 4 different levels of fees. And the rationale, again, behind having different fees charged for different sports was we looked at the numbers that we had at the time in terms of expenditures, and we came up with 4, if you will, price points. And it was really just the total cost that it took to put on the program divided by the number of attendees in the program. And that was how we came up with 4 different categories. So the most expensive of these particular endeavors were priced at the high point of $200 per athlete, and the lowest, I think, is $150. I'm not sure I have all the fees correct in my head, but again, we were trying to come up with a rationale that the more expensive the cost to offer the sport, the activity, we needed the parents to, again, pay a certain percentage of the cost of offering that sport. So there was some rationale to the 4 tiers, and I would encourage us to continue to look at those sports. Again, the message was we wanted to see if we could reduce costs and see if we could lower those fees, but that's not always within our control.
Sure, and again, I want to point out that these are direct costs, so none of the facilities costs are included in these numbers. So again, you can look through this, but you can point to a sport and say it costs that much to do it, but we're not gym time or pool time or stadium time or any of that are not in these numbers, and these are discussions that we need to have as a board on how we'd like to see those allocated and whatnot. But at any rate, it's a great first step, and I look forward to continuing the work that Chris is doing. The local debt recovery program we've covered. We also talked about the Facilities at a Glance publication. We had originally received a blank, basically a shell with the different items that were in there. I think as we went through it, there were a number of points which I think we had started with 1 page per building, and now we're up to 2. I think that there were some suggested additional items to be added, including spending since the '06 referendum. I think we're going to include in there. We're talking about capacity and where we are in enrollment versus capacity. Once again, our goal is to have this turned again and then brought to the full board so you guys can have input into what you'd like to see. We were trying to get through, at least the low-hanging fruit part of it, so that we can have a productive board meeting talking about that. The other thing that we're doing is in gathering this information, it's not just Chris and his group doing it. He's talking to the various building principals and constituents out there that are also weighing in and able to add to the communication objective for their building. Status updates. We talked about, again, facilities usage. We're still trying to get a meeting on the calendar between the district and the stakeholders. We're trying to schedule that in the near future. I know we've had some issues with scheduling that we'd like to get the group together to try to work through, and so that's on the horizon. We talked about the budget process. This meeting was held before the last board meeting, so we went through the budget update already. And then the last piece that came on the agenda was the stormwater retention issue. And I think the only point to make on the stormwater retention is showed up in the paper. Obviously, it's an issue that the city is grappling with. We want to stay on top of the issue. We want to stay informed. There's nothing new to report to the group at this point in time, except that the city is sent it to committee for further consideration. I do think that, as we were talking, I think we want to make sure that everybody knows that we're willing to be a good partner and work with the city to explore solutions to this issue that address it while protecting the safety of our children and the utility of our facilities and grounds. So we look forward to working with the city on this when they're ready to have more substantive discussions. And that's it. Any questions?
I think it looks like we've grilled you enough in the middle of your report. Performance management, Mrs. Hirsch.
Performance Management Committee met, I believe it was September 24th. I would say that the first thing that we did is we defined an annual work plan. The responsibilities of the Performance Management Committee really revolve around just a couple of tasks. One is the superintendent's goals and performance evaluation, which is the project that goes on throughout the year. A couple of the special projects that the committee is looking at for this year is looking at administrator compensation and contracts and looking at some of the challenges that we might face and seeing if there are guidelines and consistencies that we can bring forth to contribute. Performance evaluations, both of administrative staff, building principals, and teachers. There are significant changes this year, so we're looking at that. And then district performance indicators. So those are the main responsibilities for the committee for the year. In mapping out these responsibilities, it looks as though we will not need to schedule a meeting for October, November, and possibly April. So I will actually, Mr. Pernod, I think I'm going to get this to you so that we can amend the minutes and include our work plan so that everybody knows when we're going to be covering which topic. But for the November meeting, the December meeting, which will be the next committee meeting, we'll be looking at hopefully the results of the Harris survey poll and start pulling that information together, mapping it to district performance indicators, and preparing that for the full board. So that will be our next committee meeting. As part of our September meeting, we looked at the superintendent's goals for the year. Dave presented a draft of the goals, and the really, again, powerful messages. The goals for the superintendent are really tied to the district performance indicators that we've been talking about. So we have very strong alignment. There are some contractual things. At the last board meeting, we made the determination that we would like to extend the superintendent's contract by a year, and we are working through some of the details with our legal representation. Mr. Collins and I are, and the goals fit into that whole process because they actually become part of the contract. So we've had some discussion during the meeting about that, and we have work in progress on that. Mr. Pernod shared the principal evaluation. In the state of Illinois, it is a requirement that principal evaluations for this school year that we are in now include a portion of their performance evaluation is going to be based on student growth numbers. This is the first time in our district that an individual employee's performance evaluation is going to be tied to student growth. So we were looking at the approaches that we're going to be taking for these building principals. They were required to be approved by October 1st. Everything is in place. This is a challenging thing for us to make this switch. And so that's something that is, I think, of concern to all of us, and we're going to try to be very careful with that as we go through that. We talked about performance indicators and the Harris survey, which we've been looking at for over a year. There is, the survey instrument is something that is going to allow us to measure the satisfaction of both students, staff, and parents on a number of metrics, and is going to be able to give us very detailed data at the building level as well as the district level in terms of how all of our stakeholders are, how they perceive the services that we offer. It's a very thorough survey. It's a professional survey, and it's something that I think is going to enable us to not only solicit feedback, but they also provide information which guides us in terms of what particular items are the most powerful items that we can actually affect change. It really gives us direction in terms of where to put our energies and how we can improve overall morale and performance within the district. There is some movement at the state, but at this point in time, we had very, very little information about what the state was doing. They have awarded a contract to the University of Chicago to actually attempt to implement a satisfaction survey that schools would use, a cultural survey. But we've been looking at this Harris survey, been trying to put this into place, and I think it's a much more powerful tool than the unknown that may or may not be coming from the state this year. The other thing that I would say that is very important about the Harris survey is it is directly tied to our district performance indicators. We've been waiting to get this data, so we have baseline data, and we can set goals and get all of these softer things involved as well with our DPIs. So the survey will be conducted in the last 2 weeks in October. I think, Mr. Pano, are we still on track for that?
We may be looking at, you have it in front of you this evening on consent agenda to approve the contract. I'm going to contact Harris. More realistically, it may be the last week in October, first week in November might be a better rollout, but I'll have more information as I talk to Harris about what their timeline is and realistically when they can get the surveys to us, and we can upload email addresses to them for them to start that process. So still looking at probably the last week in October. If that changes, I'll let the board know, but that's where we are right now.
Okay, so look for your survey. Please fill it out. We're looking for the greatest participation that we can possibly get. We have coverage, I think, Mr. Pano, for all of the students to be able to participate in the survey. Is that right?
All students from grades 4 through 12. All of our staff, both certified staff and support staff, and then all parents in the district.
So for those parents, we're going to be sending out an email with a link to the survey. So talk to all your friends and neighbors who have kids in the schools. We're looking for as great a response rate as we can get. The more information that we have, the better decisions we can make. And that's it. Any questions?
Mrs. Stufen.
I just thought it was important to note that the Harris survey is nationally normed, so you're looking at how you're doing in comparison to other districts across the country, and that they've been around for, what, 4 or 5 decades? So they have the history and the data, which was very important for us as we made the recommendation.
Mr. McDonough.
I don't want to pull it off the consent agenda and make extra work, so I'll just ask the question here. Are any of those extra services, any of the analytics, any of the comparisons, is there an intention to add on any of those additional services? Because I really think this is an important piece of that whole accountability thing that Maria was outlining. Very important.
When I investigated the added services, if they identify like districts, when I talked to Harris about that, it's somewhat limited, and I'm not sure, quite frankly, it's worth the extra funding that they're asking for. We're going to get a national standard that we're going to be compared against. What they do is, for the extra funding, they will pull 2 or 3 other districts across the country based on your demographics and do a comparison with 2 or 3 other districts. I'm not sure that is as robust as it should be, so I'm really not looking at that one. So I think what you have in front of you tonight is probably the total cost of this survey.
I can also
point out that we did talk in committee. We wanted to make sure that we could offer the survey in Spanish for those Spanish-speaking families so they can fully participate. There will be opportunities. I think, Mr. Pano, we had talked about offering parents an opportunity if they don't have access to a computer at home, either a paper copy of the survey or another way to actually get the survey. And so we're looking to get as many people.
Yeah, and when I talked to Harris, they are recommending that we have paper surveys for parents in each of our offices. They would be in a sealed envelope. Parents would simply pick it up, fill out the survey. There's a self-addressed survey envelope that goes directly to Harris. Parents would fill out the survey, put it in the envelope, and it ships directly to Harris. So that'll be part of the cost that is part of their service.
Anything else? Mr. Bloom.
I apologize if you mentioned this already, but this is a survey that Dave has direct experience with, and I think in some of the add-on stuff we talked to Dave about, and Dave, having been through this a number of times, feels comfortable. He can interpret, so it'll save us some money by not having to bring in a consultant to interpret. So, so this is something that has been tested and tried, and Dave believes is very valuable to us.
Anything else? I just want to throw one more thing in here as it relates to administration, evaluations, and goals. I had made a statement based upon something that we talked about in a board meeting in the spring that Mrs. Ebner challenged me on, So I went back and asked our administration to check it out. And the statement was that of the 388 unit districts in Illinois, when the State Board of Education measures all of those 388 districts on the basis of administrative cost per student, that District 205 ranks 378 out of the 388. And then we had a little discussion about, is that just in the Finance and Operations Department, or is that administration in total? It turns out that that is administration in total. So, you know, in other words, there are only 9 unit districts that invest less than Elmhurst 205 does in administration and management. So I just wanted to make sure that we clarified that. So with that, let's move on to the superintendent's agenda. I'm looking for a motion for the consent agenda. Mrs. Hirsch.
I move that we approve the superintendent's consent agenda, items A through C.
And I need a second.
A second.
Mr. McDonough. Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mr. McDonough. We're spending money, so we need a roll call vote. Mrs. Walsh?
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney is absent. Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. That is 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent. Superintendent's agenda is passed. And the next on our agenda is upcoming meetings. We have a few, but less than normal, it seems. Wednesday, October 10th, is the Curriculum and Instruction Committee meeting at 7 p.m. in this room. That is the meeting that got canceled last Wednesday. Tuesday, October 16th, is the Finance and Operations Committee meeting at 6:30 in this room. Tuesday, October 23rd, is our regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting at 7:30 in these rooms. And Tuesday, October 30th, the Board Improvement and Policy Committee meeting at 7 p.m. in this room. The next on our agenda is action on closed session items, student discipline. Motion by Mrs. Hirsch.
I move that the Board of Education approve the administrative recommendation for the expulsion of York High School student B for the remainder of the 2012-13 school year and the 2013-14 school year, effective October 10th, 2012.
Since this is an expulsion item, we need a roll call vote. Oh, and I need a second as well, don't I? I'm ahead of myself. Mrs. Ebner, moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Ebner. And since this is an expulsion item, I need a roll call vote. Mrs. Walsh.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney is absent. Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. That's 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent. Motion carries. And the next is board communications. Mr. Bloom.
I don't know, Dave, does anybody want to talk about budget at a glance? I know we may have touched on this before, but does Malia, or is there anything to talk about here?
This is an update. So this is an update of what we presented last year. We were trying to push this ahead a little bit because we want to present it to the Citizens Advisory Committee that is meeting for the first time on Thursday, but we wanted the Board of Education to see the document before then, so that's why it's being presented to you this evening. Sure. You're the first ones to see it as far as I know, so we just wanted to make sure you had the date.
Sure. I mean, once again, it looks like a fantastic job, and I think we just wanted to call out the great work that Malia and her staff are doing, and Chris and the rest of the folks that are inputting into this. So thank you.
Mrs. Stufen. Sorry, I jumped at once.
I just want to highlight, I mean, I think it is significant, it's in front of us that we really articulate it's the story that's told through this budget at a glance about the realities of those external and internal forces that are causing some of the tough decisions that we have to make. And it educates everybody about what the realities are. It will be utilized as a source as we prepare our legislative engagement, District 205 specificity with the legislators that we have been guided to do. So it's valuable, not just for our constituents, our employees, and for the board and for our taxpayers, but for us to advocate on behalf of District 205 and the realities of our situation and decisions that we have to make. So it's valuable.
This will be available online. We do print limited copies of this, but you might have noticed that we have shrunk the size of this to save paper because that's another budget reality. So I want to thank Kathy Schrader for coming up with this idea.
Mrs. Hirsch, you had something as well.
I seem to remember, I think there was a meeting, I think, on TIF. Could you give us an update on where we are on TIF?
Are we finished with budget at a glance?
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I was done with budget at a glance. It's great,
Okay.
so I was moving on. I'm sorry.
Allow me to
Thank you.
Allow me to make one comment. This won an award last year, and I think I either heard or read the comment somewhere that Malia Smith and Chris Welton won an award for doing their jobs. Well, the reality is last year was the first time this publication was ever available to the taxpayers in Elmhurst. And it's not the fact that they were doing their jobs, it's they went beyond what their job description states, and they did something extra, something that helps our board communicate with our taxpayers exactly where their money goes and what it's spent on and the cost structure of our school district. So with that said, this is a lot of work. And we appreciate the effort that you put in, and we appreciate your furthering the board's goals in enhancing our discussion with our community and being as transparent as possible to our community. So thank you. Now, let's move on.
Can you give me an update on TIF status?
Go right ahead, Mr. Bloom.
All right. We did meet with the city last week. It was the only meeting I think that we've had since the last time we talked. So, and I mean, I guess probably the easiest way to do this is to go through kind of what we've agreed on, and then there's one open issue that we have, and I think as what's on the table right now is basically $1 million payment to District 205. Which is something like $1.5 million of total surplus release from TIF 2, of which our portion would be $1 million. And that's payable within 60 days of the execution of an intergovernmental agreement. The second piece, and these are all, I think, things that have been publicized, the second piece is 10% of the tax increment generated in TIF 4 beginning in the 11th year. The city believes that this is could be worth as much as $4 million based on their aggressive case of projections. But I do think that we need to make sure that everybody understands that this is 10% of some number, and that number could be 0. It's entirely dependent on the performance in TIF 4. So lest we start to try to spend it before it's there, it's worth somewhere between 0 and plus or minus $4 million based on their aggressive case. And we have an agreement on that. The third piece that we agree on is an agreement to meet every 4 years with District 205 to discuss the status and plans for all TIF eligible projects. So every 4 years there'll be a meeting where they will talk to us about the status of what's going on now as well as their plans for the future. And that becomes particularly important because of the fourth piece, which is kind of where the sticking point has been, which is the city represents that they've offered us $6 million in reimbursement for TIF eligible capital funds expended that we spend on Churchville or Conrad Fisher. So what we would do is we would spend the money, potentially borrow the funds, and make the capital improvements, and then we would submit for reimbursement to the city our invoice, if you will, to them to reimburse. And what they have offered is to, at some point in time in 23 years, at their full discretion to pay us that money. But there's no obligation for them to pay us that money. And there is no, the payment of that money is also not tied explicitly to the performance of that TIF. So there are no guarantees. So again, I think that we need to make sure that the folks, that our constituents understand that that number could be between $0 and $6 million, depending upon the city's discretion. So again, let's not, I don't want people to think that we can go spend that money before we have it, because it could be $0. So the only guaranteed piece of this is the $1 million that we receive up front. The rest of it is contingent. The 10% obviously contingent upon the performance of the TIF. The $6 million contingent upon the city council. So we continue to negotiate. What we're trying to do is to agree on a mechanism that adds more certainty to that $6 million of capital, so that we can plan on it a little bit better. And so those discussions are ongoing.
I just want to make sure I have the time frame right. So the $1 million is something that is pretty imminent, assuming we can pen a deal, right? The $1 million release from TIF 2. And then it would be after 2022. These numbers don't sound like normal. I'm having difficulty with the years. We're in 2012 already. So the 10% of increment in year 11 would begin in 2023?
Correct.
Is when we would begin to see if there is a revenue stream coming in.
Right.
That's when we would see 10% distribution to all taxing bodies. So we would get
right.
whatever
we
our
would get
percentage
our
is,
share of that
70-ish
10%.
something.
Right.
Okay. And then the $6 million in the capital piece that we were talking about could be as late as 2035, the end of the TIF.
Right. If you wanted to take this to an extreme, it could be, well, it could be at the end of the TIF, or it could be not at all. It is not,
Okay.
there's no obligation that's created on the part of the city to give it to us. It's, I mean, the city has been a good partner in the past, but this is totally up to their discretion in the future. And I think that it is to our benefit to, I think Mr. Wise Man once said, good fences make good neighbors, and good agreements make good partners. And so I think we're trying to get to the point where we can have this written down for the time when I don't know that any of us are going to be sitting at either one of our tables, either whether it's here or over at City Hall, so that there's not an issue with interpretation or intent when we are long gone. So.
If I can add just one thing to that, just to emphasize the point that the history of the city is they have been generous. I mean, TIF laws are written clearly, give the city all the cards. And the city of Elmhurst has been very generous over the past decades with the school district when it comes to TIFs and revenue sharing and sharing from the proceeds of the TIF. What we're trying to avoid in the future by trying to negotiate an agreement that is fairly specific is that in the future, sometime between now and 2035, some future school board can focus on the business of running the school district instead of fighting with the city over this $6 million that is intended for us but may or may not materialize. So that's the intent of all we're trying to do, is come up with something that is more specific that works for both the city and the school district. Mr. McDonough.
Just a question. The city has already released the property south of North Avenue without having an amendment of their contractual obligations to pay surplus under the 2004 agreement. Is that right? They've already passed their ordinance releasing those properties.
They have passed the ordinance,
Okay.
yes.
And my understanding is that the $6 million in capital expenditure, capital payments, is in compensation to the district for the re-tiffing of those properties for another 23 years. And it's part of that package of the three things that Chris laid out, as well as captured natural growth and captured new growth. I think there's sometimes a little misunderstanding that this is some sort of gift or present from the city. And I don't think that's true. It's not a favor. It's compensation for removing these. It's negotiated settlement with both parties looking at their rights and their obligations under existing law and existing 2004 intergovernmental agreement. And I think the discretion that the city asks for in this contract should reflect the genesis of that payment promise. And I think that to the extent we can, request the city to restrain its discretion to make no payment at all or lesser payment. I think it's in everybody's best interest to write an effective intergovernmental agreement so that we don't have an issue, as Jim said, later on down the road.
And that is what we're trying to come up to with a mutually acceptable agreement is, I mean, I think we've all agreed that the timing of that money is somewhat uncertain, and we're just trying to come up with ways so that we can make the renovations that those buildings need when we need to make them, and collect the money for those renovations, even if it's at some future point during the TIF, and figure out exactly how to do that, and that's what we're talking about now. Mrs. Stufen.
Because the reality is the two schools that are within the TIF 4 district, meaning Conrad Fisher and Churchville Middle School, both need capital funds to be spent on them. And we've known that for many years now. So it's not that we're asking for something that is not TIF eligible and qualified and all those sorts of things.
In terms of the need at those schools, Churchville is, just because of when it was built, 1986, it is the second neediest school in terms of capital improvements. It needs plumbing, it needs air conditioning, it needs heating, it needs all those mechanical things that just wear out when the building is that age. And so, yes, we need to make those renovations sooner rather than later. And again, it's just the timing issue. And when you look at Conrad Fisher, it is one of our, if not our fastest growing student population. And eventually, we're just going to run out of square feet at that school. Anything else?
Just one quick update for the Board of Education. I was in a conference on Friday and heard from 2 state representatives on pension reform, and I know that's still an ongoing topic at the state legislators. We heard from State Representative Mike Fortner, and he has introduced the House Bill 6204 that takes a different look at a solution to the pension formula. He had just introduced it. It is still being studied, but a lot of people thought it had merit, and the benefit of his plan is it does not require districts to pay into the pension program, but rather has some other solutions to that. We also then heard from House Representative Lane Nurkertz, who is the House Pension Chair, and her take was that there will probably be some kind of pension reform by the spring of next year. No further movement except on their front was from the governor's proposal that was turned into a House and Senate bill that required additional payments by the district, some other changes in employee benefits. One of the big issues on both of these is the constitutionality of changing the pension system, and there are various opinions about what you can and can't do with the pension system in Illinois. That seems to be one of the big hurdles that they are working with right now. However, they do expect some kind of introduction in the spring and some kind of passage coming up. So we'll keep you updated, but that's the latest that I've heard about.
Thank you. And again, I think we widely anticipate something to be done on this pension issue, probably right after the November elections, and probably before January when the legislature in Springfield changes over to the newly elected officials. This has been a time when legislature seems to get active, particularly in controversial issues. And for the few people that are sitting out here today and anybody who watches this, I would encourage you to write or contact your representatives in Springfield and tell them that burdening local school districts with increased pension costs is not a student-friendly thing to do. It will require us to further tighten our belt, which translates to increasing class sizes, cutting the richness of our curriculum, and that is not something we want to do. So anything you can do to make your voice heard in Springfield on this issue, we welcome and encourage. Ms. Hirsch.
Motion to adjourn?
There's a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mr. McDonough. All in favor? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We're adjourned.